Welcome to this journey where we dialogue with thought and heart leaders to share their reflections on human condition and how to improve them.
At the turn of the Enlightenment or the Renaissance, the promise was that we need to shed away our thinking and our behavior based on, based on just beliefs or traditions, and we need to look at the reach of reason to guide us in our journey. And we saw a whole, couple of centuries of development and progress. This may be a little bit of digress, but I'm sure you'll enjoy this. But we tried to first install democracy as one mechanism or one system to get rid of the earlier system, which was more driven by a few people, concentration of power in the hands of few versus distributed power. And we landed with democracy, and we have some really good democracies across the world. But of late, we are seeing that there is this whole thing of deep polarization. People using the very reach of reason and logic to support their candidatures and arguments. In the wake of this, do you think this could become problematic in organizations, or how would this play out? I'm just curious. Have you had meditations on this?
Yeah, that's really it's a really interesting lens to look at it through. I hadn't thought about that before. I don't know if this answers your question, but it brings to mind a kind of idea that I saw. There's a business school professor called Julian Birkinshaw, and he has this theory that we had kind of three big eras in the world of work. We had the industrial era, which really kind of shaped massively the way that we work, and is very much still the dominant paradigm today, I would argue. And then from the industrial era, we then had this new phase of like the knowledge era. And then he says that now we're kind of entering this new phase of kind of post-knowledge era. We don't really know what it's called or much about it yet, but it's kind of emerging now. And so he says in the industrial era the kind of the scarce resource was capital. That was the thing that was valued. It was like people and resources and so on. And then in the knowledge era, it was knowledge. Knowledge was power. That was information and everything. And now we're kind of in this age where we have almost too much information, too much knowledge, and knowledge is so readily available. So he says in this new emerging era, actually what's going to make a difference is heart. So he kind of describes them as like industrial era hands, knowledge era head, and now this era is more about heart. And in a leadership context, that means then what we really need now is leaders who have like emotional awareness, can be more intuitive, can have conviction and able to make decisions. People who can make sense of and tell stories with the information and the data that we have, and kind of connect to what people need, and be much more like a coaching role, I suppose. So I think that's really interesting. So you kind of mentioned the shifting from kind of relying on beliefs and traditions and stuff, and moving more to reason. And in a way, I feel like this is a kind of evolution of that as well, where it's like we're now tapping into, more than ever, we need to tap into our human qualities, especially with kind of AI and automation and stuff like that happening so quickly. I think it's really important for us to focus on what makes us human and what do we want to keep human before it's too late, in a way. Which is kind of another tangent a little bit, I guess, in terms of technology and AI and things like that. But I think it's relevant. I think now more than ever is a really important time to be learning more about what makes us human. And I think neuroscience plays a big part in that, in understanding our brains and how they work, and understanding that in a lot of ways we're wired we have a kind of disadvantage just by the very way that our brains are wired, because we perceive so many things as threats in a social context that get in the way for us to be good leaders or to be innovative or to be compassionate, or so I think the more we understand about us and what makes us human, the more we can be effective in this kind of emerging era, kind of post-knowledge era.
If we were to frame business as a global colony in itself, and us all being part of this colonialization called business, then there is no getting away from the global practices and the global peer pressures of performance that compels you to follow a certain path in terms of it could be numbers, it could be the way these organizations are ranked globally. In the wake of this, how do you see? I know it's slightly difficult, and I'm just trying to. I'm actually asking you to stick your neck out and look in the future and guide us. But maybe maybe how would this pan out? Because here is this huge empire called business, which is governing our lives so much, including the governments. They're influencing a lot of government decisions. And then there are these pockets of wonderful work like you're doing and others are doing in reinventing organizations. How do you think this will pan out in times to come?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think you're right. I think we're seeing. I don't know if you know the work of Otto Scharmer and Theory U.
Yes, MIT.
Yes, he talks a lot about how there are these three kind of divides happening in the world at the moment: a divide between self and environment, that we're kind of destroying the earth, and a divide between self and other, that we're kind of ignoring or neglecting or harming each other. And I think things like Brexit and Donald Trump are kind of great examples of that. And this divide between self and self, that we are so far away from the selves that we would like to be, but we're kind of zombies, really, kind of going through the motions. So I think that a lot of the systems that we have in place in the world right now are kind of, we're starting to see some real cracks and limitations of them, kind of politically, environmentally, and of course in the world of business. So I think people are recognizing that it's not sustainable to grow continuously. For example, at some point there aren't enough resources in the earth for all of the companies in the world to keep growing, and making money isn't enough. Like Unilever recognizes that growing and making money isn't enough. If we use all the resources, then they can't exist as a company. So they've recognized that they need to change the way that they operate and be much more environmentally responsible, for example. And it's interesting considering that there are a lot of companies exploring different structures now that are far more, employee ownership and much more empowering and things like that. But all of our legal structures are still very much geared towards the traditional, you have to have a single person who's accountable, who's responsible, liable for things. And if you're self-employed, like in the UK, for example, the process you have to go through to pay your corporation tax, for example, is incredibly exclusive. It really excludes a lot of people who can't deal with that very complex, not very intuitive, user-friendly information. So a lot of our systems are old or outdated and aren't serving us anymore. So my hope is that in the future we'll see these systems start to evolve and accommodate other ways of operating in businesses, for example, because at the moment a lot of companies they have like a structure on paper that's just for legal purposes, but in practice they operate in a different way and it's free and everything. So then they're kind of having to expend energy on ticking boxes for things that's really not adding any value to their company. So I think my hope is that books like Reinventing Organizations have really kind of captured a feeling in people where people are really craving a way of working that's more soulful, that's more meaningful, people in the startup world, for example, are kind of challenging this paradigm of startup, get big enough that you can get bought out, and then that's it, kind of thing. And some people saying, well, no, I want to start a company because I really care about that thing, and being bought isn't my ultimate outcome. I want to do more than that. I want to set up a company to create meaning, not just to make money. So I think we are seeing the beginnings of a real paradigm shift, and I hope that the systems in place will somehow support that. I mean, it seems a bit, I don't know, when I think about like the 1% and things like that, I wonder how that's possible, because there's such, there are an elite few in the world that really benefit from keeping things the way they are and systems the way they are. Yeah. So I think they will fight very hard to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And I wish I had some wonderful answer or solution of how to change that. But my hope is that that small disturbances will happen all over the world that eventually will result in the systems that they can't stay how they are anymore, that they have to change.
Reaching a tipping point.
Yeah, exactly. A tipping point.
Yeah. I'm sure you're also following the new economic thinking that is taking place, where people like Stiglitz, Piketty are actually highlighting the very issues that you just raised in terms of the growing inequality, rent-seeking behavior, so on and so forth. And I'm sure these voices are now reaching the main alleys of power, and I'm sure it's going to be an all-out war in times to come. Between people who are already there in power, trying to preserve that, which has always been the case in our human journey, I think. Yeah. Interesting. So, sorry, I took a detour and I just went completely macro.
No, it's really interesting.
Yeah.